And we are live. Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Let me just prepare my screen. Yes, we are live also on Twitter. We're good. I'm just checking. There we go. Tac. Twitter is fine. Up. Alright, I'm all yours. So welcome for today's news review. I hope you had a good beginning of the week. Things are busy. And kind of like monomaniac, let's say, because these days, I mean, all the oxygen in Europe, at least, is sucked out by what's going on in Greenland, the perspective of potential trade war again between the EU and the US, and the question: okay, can the European de-escalate things with Trump, or are we going towards a clear and direct clash between Europe and the US over what's going to happen in Greenland, and beyond that, the perspective of a potential trade war. So yeah, we're going to discuss about that today. Let me just clean up some stuff. So as usual, we are of course live on Twitch, also live on Twitter, but chat is only on Twitch. So if people on Twitter want to come over and participate in the chat, well, you click the link, there's a link below, and that brings you on Twitch, and you can chat with the rest of us. So, like I said, today it's all about Trump, Greenland, and everything. So first, we're going to talk about the hopes of European leaders to de-escalate things with Trump over in Davos, because we have the World Economic Forum that started in Davos, in Switzerland, and Trump is supposed to speak tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. And leaders hope they can find a way out of this there. Otherwise, well, things are not going to go well. Second topic we're going to discuss is the trade bazooka of the EU, the ACI, the anti-coercion instrument. That's been talked a lot over the past few days, which is like kind of the trade bazooka, the big red button that the EU can use whenever there is a trade war, and there's debate whether or not the EU should use it against the US, given the latest developments. So we're going to read about this, what this tool is, what it involves, how it works, and whether or not it's likely that EU countries will rely on this. And finally, a couple of articles on if things, I mean, regardless of what is going on, or rather what's going to happen, it seems pretty clear that the West is making its peace with the fact that they can't rely on the US anymore, and are starting to think about, well, what do we do next? How do we deal with a world where we can't rely on the US anymore, whether on trade, whether on defense and everything? And so slowly but surely we are coming to a discussion on what would a post US Western world could look like. So those are the topics I have selected for you today. As usual, if there are other topics you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers, you have a chat, at least on Twitch, and you can just type and we discuss about whatever. But yeah, that's the program. There we go. So unless there is already something, I suggest that we dive right in, because it's a rather busy agenda that we have on the program today. There we go. So first, like I said, Davos, so the World Economic Forum, that is becoming accidentally the kind of the last chance place to discuss to try to de-escalate things with Trump before they go further around whether or not the US is going to try to conquer Greenland, whether there's going to be a trade war, etc. And so everybody's holding their guns and hoping that things can get better in Davos when they will have the opportunity to discuss with Trump and his advisors there. What, the US is not a reliable partner? Shocker. Yeah, I mean, that the US is not a reliable partner, yeah, that we've discovered that, well, we rediscovered that last year. There's being an unreliable partner and being an outright aggressor. That's where the difference is now. Even if, say, people were already accepting, okay, we can't rely exactly on Trump, exactly, especially on trade. the idea that Trump would actually try to invade a European country was still, okay, considered a bit far-fetched. And now, the question is open. Hence, further discussion we'll have on the future of the relationship. I explained. So yeah, let's dive into this. I lost my page. Thanks for the Prime, explains. You also need to shit on the US with your Amazon Prime. Yeah, it's ironic to see that we're going to talk about a lot about how should we become more independent of the US while being on an American platform. But explains, since you did a Prime sub, you get a question. Let me pull up my quiz. So as a reminder, whenever someone is subbing on Twitch, you get a random question from my database of EU quiz. Today we're going to do question number 344. Okay, so 344, what does it say? Ah, no, you can't cheat. You can't cheat. And today's theme is going to be about music and the EU. So let me pull up my poll up. That way you can vote in chat on Twitch. I will read the question afterwards. So let me do my copy-paste right now. Nouveau sondage. Okay, I need to shorten this. Oh, bear with me a second. I really need to find a way to automate things there. Up, first copy-paste. Second. Third. And fourth. Alright, we are good. So, let me read you the question, which is again about music and the EU. So the question is the following. I will read first the question and then you will be able to vote in chat. What was the topic of the song that won the Eurovision in 1990? Was it A, the Schengen area, B, the creation of the European Union, C, the creation of a common EU currency, or D, the Erasmus program? You have 1 minute to vote in the chat. You can click it. So I repeat, what was the topic of the song that won the Eurovision, so the classic EU song European Song Contest, in 1990? Was it A, the Schengen area, B, the creation of the European Union, C, a common EU currency, or D, the Erasmus program? Up. You have still more like 30 seconds or something to vote, and then I'll tell you the... I'll tell you, so far chat is divided on what it was. Up. There we go. Few more seconds to vote, and then I'll tell you the actual correct answer on who won. I mean, what was the topic of the song that won the Eurovision in 1990? And so most of you said that it was the creation of the Schengen area, and actually you were wrong. The correct answer was the creation of the EU. So let me story time. So in 1990, back in the prehistoric time, the Stone Age, the song that won the Eurovision was called Insieme 1992. It was an Italian song, and actually the song was won by an Italian singer with the song Insieme 1992, which was anticipating the creation of the European Union by the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. So the song is about the creation of a European market that would become the European Union with the the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. So it was a bit of a poetical fiction, that song, because again the song was in 1990 and Maastricht was done in 1992. But the song correctly envisioned the creation of what would become the European Union. So ChatGPT failed, and Lusha got the right answer. Okay. So much should have voted for B. Ah, well, next time you'll have it. So yeah, that was your question of the day. Thanks again to Explain for the sub, which gave you that allowed you to have this little quiz. Back on track. Oh, sorry. Let me get on the right thing. There we go. All right. So back on track. On the news up. So the EU clings to hope it can defuse Trump at Davos. European leaders are in watch and wait mode ahead of the US president visits to the continent this week. Donald Trump's address to the World Economic Forum in Davos on Wednesday will help determine the tone of Europe's response to the US president's tariff threats as leaders desperately search for an off-ramp from the standoff. So, as a reminder, Trump has been upping the ante on wanting to take over Greenland, so this autonomous territory of Denmark, next to the US, and try to answer to the threat of the US that officially is built on the need to protect the US national security, protect the Arctic area from Russia and China, etc. Denmark had a military exercise that was planned for quite some time now, to which they invited also some, at the last minute, some European countries, so seven other European countries, including France, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, the UK, etc., where they basically sent a few soldiers to participate to the exercise and do some reconnaissance in Greenland to see, okay, what things could look like there and what could possibly be needed to reinforce the European military presence in Greenland and thus increase the secularization of the Arctic, which on paper is the main worry of Trump in Greenland. Trump did not take that very well because he said, "Oh, how dare they send soldiers against the US? I'm announcing a trade tariff against those countries that send soldiers and that are against the US taking over Greenland. A 10% tariff that would kick off from the 1st of February, and that would increase then in June," which was completely unexpected from the Europeans, who saying, okay, you say we don't secure the Arctic, we send soldiers to secure the Arctic, and then you tell us, you threaten us with tariff because we do exactly what you say we're not doing, so what the fuck? So that created, that triggered emergency discussions at EU level over the weekend. And now member states are waiting to see what Trump will say on Wednesday at Davos to see, okay, is there still a way out, or are we now in a upfront fight with the US? So European governments are holding out hope they can lower the temperature and get Trump to abandon his vow to slap punitive tariff on European countries that have opposed the sale of Greenland to the US. Politico spoke to 11 diplomats and 2 EU officials, all of whom said they want to avoid retaliation and are betting that a diplomatic solution to the crisis can still be found. The focus is getting the ball rolling in Davos. Then we will take stock at an emergency EU leaders summit convened for Thursday, said one EU diplomat. The pressure needs to come down. So first, we talk to Trump in a one-to-one format in Davos, and then on Thursday, we debrief and say, okay, is there a way out, or are we into it? Trump's announcement on Saturday, in which he threatened 6 EU countries plus the UK and Norway, so those who participated to the military exercise of Denmark, he threatened them with additional 10% tariff as of next month because they haven't supported his design on Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory in the Kingdom of Denmark, has sparked the biggest rupture in transatlantic relations in decades. A key reason the EU is loath to come out swinging is that no one knows whether Trump will actually follow through on his threat, and they are terrified of needlessly exploding already frayed transatlantic ties, according to the diplomats. So basically there, we know that Trump loves to make threats. Will he actually go ahead with the threats? Question mark. And so the EU is kind of in a wait-and-see position because they don't want to be the one shooting first. They want to see, okay, is he actually serious? Is he just increasing pressure for the sake of increasing pressure and actually a deal can be made? So they need to get more clarity on what Trump actually wants to do and intends to do, and only when they will know whether or not he's serious and whether or not he is restarting a trade war, then the EU will answer. They don't want to be the first to shoot and escalating things that could have been avoided. Especially at a moment where the EU has other things to do. I mean, they would rather focus on Ukraine rather than the defense of their own territory against the US. And for them, it's like, okay, why are we even like talking about this? We have better things to do right now. But well, in Trump world, everything is possible. So all the diplomats and EU officials Politico spoke with caution that it was too early to threaten to deploy the EU's anti-coercion instrument or trade bazooka, an idea being championed by French President Emmanuel Macron. So we'll discuss about that too after. It's the next topic, so I won't go right now into the detail. Wielding the instrument, an all-purpose tool meant to deter other countries from using trade tactics to extort concessions in other areas, still faces significant opposition. The leader of the EU's biggest political force, the EPP, said at an internal meeting on Monday that the option should be off the table and that the EU must be tough with the Americans in private, but de-escalate in public, according to two people in the room. German Foreign Minister Johann van der Pfeil and his Italian counterpart Antonio Tajani took a similar line at the same meeting. Macron is right as always. I mean, again, it's a question of, self-fulfilling prophecy, in the sense of if you pull the trigger first, then you create the scenario that you wanted to avoid by saying, okay, we're going to activate the mechanism, the anti-coercion mechanism. So it relates a bit to what I was saying before. Would Trump actually shoot? Let him shoot first. Otherwise, we're just triggering things before. And France is, as usual, the bad cop on this, the one advocating for strong measure. Let's say it's the role that is pretty safe for France to take, because France is the country that is the least dependent on the US, notably on its security, and politically it always plays very well in France to take a strong position against the US. So Macron is not taking a lot of risk on that. In other countries, that might be that situation might be a bit different. So Macron and France being the bad cop is expected, and it's kind of their role. Then the question is, should we go that way? Depends a bit on what the lay of the land is. If Trump is backing off from tomorrow, showing sign that he would back off, or on the 1st of February is actually not pulling up the tariff, okay, pulling the ACI is not useful. If on the 1st of February he's going all in and keeps saying, I don't give a shit, I don't want any deal, I'm just going to take over Greenland, that's a different discussion. For now, we're still in the gray zone, where maybe not, there might be an off-ramp to avoid the trade war, and so the need to trigger the ACI. So we need to be very, especially since in the context of Trump, and we know that Trump doesn't think as fast as he can tweet, and so if you take a very strong public position, his reaction is always to escalate. Like you say, I'm going to do this. Oh yeah, I'm going to do this even further. And so he's triggering you to go even further, etc., etc. So hence why member states are kind of keen on, okay, let's not like overreact. Let's not say, oh, we're going to trigger like the ACI, we're going to wreck you if you do this. Because given how Trump is working, it will automatically escalate. So let's see if in private we can try to find an agreement or not. If not, then okay, we'll have to go. But until then, let's not feed the troll. So we need to be very moderate because our goal is not to fight with the Americans. Our goal is to strengthen our economy, Tajani told Politico. We want to talk with the Americans. Of course, it's not in the also it's not in the interest of the Europeans to go in all-out war with the Americans. MEP Nicola Procaccini, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's right-hand man in the European Parliament, added, "We have to avoid the escalations." The Italians being part of the countries that tend to be have better relations with the US, so Meloni is kind of trying to say, okay, let's talk, maybe we can salvage this. 3 diplomats Politico spoke with said the tool was still being considered, but as a last resort option that requires more consideration within capitals. Ambassadors on Monday relayed a growing resolve to hit back that had emerged from the 3 hours meeting on Sunday. The mood is shifting, said a senior EU diplomat. We need to be stronger and firmer. Trump probably respects the show of force more than the end that you expect to him, because this is for him a sign of weakness. In parallel, European embassies in Washington are coordinating among themselves to reach out to key US industries and firms that would be hit by potential EU countermeasures in an effort to build pressure on Trump to abandon the plan. So you go see the big European companies say, hey, you're on our list of retaliation, so maybe you would have an interest in telling Trump and the Republicans that you do not want to be in the let's say in the crossfire of a EU-US trade war. So tell the US politician that everybody needs to chill. Otherwise, you're the first on the line. They are also reaching out to members of Trump's entourage and to Republicans running for re-election in midterms election in the US in November. So that's also the big political question. We know that Trump is not facing a very favorable situation in the midterm elections, so the legislative elections that will take place in November. He has the risk of losing the Congress and so his majority, which is not his interest, and the candidates, the Republican candidates, might be keen to avoid going into something that would not help them during their campaign. Typically, going in an all-out war over Greenland at the moment is not something very popular in the US. In the polls do not indicate that Americans are, yeah, sure, let's go invade Greenland, and sure, let's go into a trade war that might have economic impact on us, and therefore make the situation more politically complicated for the Republicans. So the timing is also something that the Europeans can use to say, hey, chill the fuck out. What we are trying to do is influence members of Congress, said the senior EU diplomat above, who was in the room when ambassadors held their emergency meeting on Sunday evening. They are Republicans, they are up for re-election in November. They have to think about their audience at home. We are trying to convince them to do something. European patience and tolerance are at an all-time low, but that doesn't mean that collectively we would be prepared to use the full force of the EU's trade weapons, said the national official. We are trying to de-escalate this week. So tomorrow, all eyes on the Orange Man in Davos to see whether or not he's pulling the trigger and going all out on the trade war and taking off Greenland, thus starting a trade war with the EU, restarting a trade war with the EU, because there was a trade war last year. We kind of found a way to do a ceasefire. even if it was not under very favorable conditions for the Europeans, but well, that was kind of the best deal that was possible under the current condition, but also the possibility to trigger the collapse of NATO. Any questions on that? And Davos? Then we'll stick on the topic. It's going to be the fil rouge. Then we're going to talk about the trade bazooka, how it works. Is Greenland covered by the Lisbon Treaty on defense? 42.7. Yes, according to the Commission. So you have you have the shit, my mind is bugging out. We have Article 42.7 in the treaties that are the collective defense, let's say, the collective defense clause of the EU, meaning that if there is an attack on the EU member states, all the others are supposed to band together and help out. And so there was a debate. Is Greenland covered by this? Because Greenland is kind of a weird situation, because Greenland belongs to Denmark, Denmark being a member of the EU, but Greenland is not part of the EU, because since 1985 they voted to leave the EU. So they are part of the EU without being part of the EU. They are part of the EU member state without being part of the EU themselves. So there was a debate, okay, is Greenland covered by 42.7, etc., etc., and the Commission has said, in principle, yes, Greenland is covered by 42.7 because it's part of Greenland, of Denmark, which is a member of the EU. And so then the question is, okay, so that gives the option for Denmark, if Trump was to actually invade Greenland, that gives the option to Denmark to ask assistance to other member states through 42.7. But then again, if that happens, it's up to Denmark to ask the activation. If Denmark does not ask the activation, 42.7 is not activated. And the question, of course, Denmark would likely not activate as the activation of 42.7 if they don't see it's a unanimous vote, if they don't see unanimous support for the support to Greenland. So, and then that creates another problem. So let's say Denmark ask the assistance, the collective assistance of the EU through 42.7 following an invasion of Greenland, and one country, for instance Hungary, refuse to recognize that support. What happens? Well, that's not a good political situation, because that means then we have a situation where EU member states refuse to support their fellow members in case of a military invasion. Hence why, of course, it's not a good signal. It weakens politically considerably the EU. Hence why probably Denmark would not ask the activation of 42.7 if they're not certain that member state would support it. Bearing in mind that assistance can take many different forms, and probably that's what Denmark would explain to other countries. Say, yeah, if you say I support you, that doesn't mean you go to war with the US. You can provide assistance in many different forms. It's just political support. You can say, I'm just going to provide political support. So probably that would be the way Denmark would go see Hungary and say, hey, don't vote against me. And also from the perspective of Hungary, it could be tricky, very tricky politically for Hungary to prevent support from support to Denmark. That could be possibly the red line that would then trigger even further isolation, or even the activation of Article 7, so removing the voting rights of Hungary, because member states would then be sufficiently pissed off to say, okay, you're crossing a line there, Hungary, we're not going to tolerate it. Again, bearing in mind the context of the Hungarian election, how would that play in the electoral campaign in Hungary? Member states probably would rather see Orban go, and so not do something that would help him in the election. So it's kind of, in this case, I mean, assuming there would be an invasion of Greenland, which again is not absolutely not guaranteed, it's kind of a 3, 5, 6 dimension chess game, with implications for Denmark, for the US, for Hungary, etc., etc. So many questions would be political question would be raised if that scenario was ever, if there was ever an invasion of Greenland by the US. Up. Back. There we go. All right. No other question. Sorry. Sorry, we could put in Baltic. I won't blame them for not caring. Okay, there's a whole debate. I made a meme about that, and I pissed off many of the fans of Kaja Kallas. There's a question. Oh yeah, but Greenland is just a distraction from Ukraine. Who gives a shit about Greenland? Bon. Even if indeed the thing that the EU would rather focus on is Ukraine. That is the strategic priority that the EU would rather focus on. That being said, the country which is supposed to be your ally and the security guarantor of the EU, if it invades a member of the EU, that's kind of a big deal as well. And it would be kind of weird for the Baltic states or any of, let's say, the most hardcore support of Ukraine to say, well, we don't give a shit about Denmark, and thus legitimizing a practice that Russia could use against them. Because ultimately, like, Russia must be loving what's going on, because Trump is saying, yeah, I can do what I want. I can take by force what I consider to be something that should be mine. Which is exactly what Putin was saying in Ukraine and could be saying in the Baltic states. So if the Balts were to say, we don't give a shit about Greenland, well then they are de facto legitimizing what Russia wants to do to them. And also it's not a very good signal, because if Russia was to invade the Baltic state, then Denmark could rightfully say, yeah, fuck you. I was invaded, you say, oh yeah, I don't give a shit about you, why should I give a shit about you? Which isn't exactly probably not the signal, because, for instance, in the countries, like I said earlier, like the thing that triggered the new American tariff against European countries, some European countries, was the fact that they sent soldiers to a Danish military exercise. Within those countries, so there are 7 countries outside of Denmark. You have France, Germany, Norway, the UK, but you also have Estonia. Estonia sent 1 or 2 soldiers, so like a very small contingent. I mean, in general, it's a very small contingent, but Estonia did send soldiers to participate to the Danish exercise in Greenland. Why? Probably because they made the calculation that I just explained. If we don't support Denmark about what's happening in Greenland, we are legitimizing us being invaded by Russia later on. And we won't be able to ask Denmark for help or for the other 5. So if we want to be coherent with ourselves, we need to support Denmark as well against the US, even if we would rather focus on Ukraine. But there, it's not exactly the fault of Denmark or whoever. Like, Trump decided to make it to make a big thing about Greenland. You can't ask a member state to abandon part of its territory because of Ukraine. So it would be extremely short-sighted from Eastern Europe and the Baltic to say, I don't give a shit about Greenland because my priority is Ukraine. Probably, for instance, Poland is staying silent because, again, they don't want to lose the US, the security umbrella of the US, because of the risk of Russia, etc. So they're staying quiet because, okay, we don't want to trigger Trump. Let the other take the lead, even if privately they're telling Denmark, okay, we're with you, but we won't raise hell about this because we don't want to lose the US. So it's kind of the EU and especially Eastern Europe being between a rock and a hard place. That's the big issue for them. Alright. Checking if I missed something. No, I did not miss anything else. So let's go to the trade bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument. So, like I said, the discussion, something that has been coming up again in the discussions around Trump is following the threat of putting tariff. To justify potential invasion of Greenland, etc., etc. France, for instance, has said, okay, given what's going on, we should use the EU's trade bazooka, the anti-coercion instruments, which in theory, so it's a tool that is relatively recent. It was adopted in 2023, if I'm remembering well. That was designed with China and also a bit the US in mind, that can be used basically to kind of nuke the economic footprint of a hostile country in the EU. So that's why we call it being called the trade bazooka, because it's a very, very extensive thing that can be used to basically attack and destroy as much as possible the economic footprint of a country. So we're going to see what this instrument is and how it works. So calls grow for the EU to deploy its ultimate trade bazooka as Trump threatens fresh tariffs to force the sale of Greenland. The anti-coercion instrument would shut off access to the European single market, punishing US companies. It is powerful on paper, but untested in real life. Now it goes, it's not just shutting out access to the single market, and it's very, very large. You can do many things with this tool. You can cut access to public procurement. You can restrict intellectual property. You can take trade tariffs. There's plenty of things you could potentially do to make life difficult to hostile companies from hostile countries. It's not just shutting off access to the European single market, although you could argue that de facto it's nuking the economic footprint is done by shutting access to the single market. So yeah, okay, it's kind of a circular argument. Okay. So how does it work? Adopted in 2023, okay, so my memory was correct, the tool was designed with the US and China in mind, as the world's two biggest economies become more assertive in pushing their national interests through tariff and the weaponization of natural resources. So why the US and China? US, back in 2023, was more like of a past thought. People remembered Trump one administration where he was using tariff and trade war to try to obtain economic advantages. So they had already a bit the US and Trump in mind back then, but the more recent example was China. Why? Because China had economically attacked Lithuania. Why? Lithuania basically made a huge mistake, a huge crime in the eyes of China. They opened in Lithuania an embassy of Taiwan, which is a big no-no for China because China, the Republic of China, the Democratic Republic of China, rather, considers, I always, it's the Popular Republic of China, considers that Taiwan is not a country, it doesn't exist, it's part of China, it's just a secessionist region of China. And so they say if you want to have any kind of relationship with us, you cannot recognize Taiwan as a state. And by opening an embassy of Taiwan in Lithuania was kind of sort of recognizing the existence of Taiwan as a state. And so China, in retaliation to that, cut off access to the Chinese market to Lithuania. So Lithuanian products were being blocked from access to the Chinese market. And what they were doing, they were targeting specifically Lithuanian products, or things that had Lithuanian products in Lithuanian parts in them. And then they were telling to the rest of the EU, well, you know, we don't have a problem with you, but if you told Lithuania to close down their embassy, etc., and to stop doing these things, a terrible thing with Taiwan, that would be good. And so they were using trade. They were doing that without saying it was about Taiwan. They were inventing like bullshit excuses to close down the access to the market to Lithuania. So there, basically, what was going on is that China was using trade or economic sanctions as an indirect tool to pressure Lithuania and the EU into doing something that had nothing to do with trade. The closure of the Taiwanese embassy. So that's why we're talking about coercion. You're using the economy and trade to obtain results in something that has nothing to do with trade. And so the EU developed this anti-coercion tool to have an answer to this kind of practice. Okay, so under the existing legislation, economic coercion exists when a third country, so a country that is not member of the EU, applies or threatens to apply measures affecting trade or investment in order to prevent or obtain the cessation, modification, or adoption of a particular act by the EU or a member state. President Trump is threatening tariffs from the 1st of February ranging from 10 to 25% if Denmark does not agree to sell Greenland by June. On paper, it looks like coercion. It's a textbook example of what economic coercion is. Trump is threatening a trade war to push Denmark and the EU to agree to sell Greenland to the US. So, in theory, you have a use case. The EU could potentially use the ACI, so the trade bazooka, to retaliate to that threat from the US. So, why is the anti-coercion tool seen as a bazooka? Last year, the EU mulled different options of possible retaliations as the US threatened to hammer the bloc with tariff on Liberation Day. Liberation Day is the name that Trump gave to that I think it was like the 3rd of April last year, when he declared trade war on everyone, with a tariff on pretty much everyone except countries like Russia or North Korea, so friendly people, and he called that Liberation Day. So back then, Brussels drew a list of American items that would be it, affecting states mostly ran by Republican governors in a tit-for-tat move. So, classic, you put tariff on me, I put tariff on you. At the peak of transatlantic tensions, the EU said it would target 93 billion euros worth of goods, including bourbon, airplane components, which would have dented Boeing, soybean, and poultry among them. So basically, there is the kind of goods that they target is, okay, we're going to eat them where it hurts, and so to hurt Trump, we're going to go eat goods that come from states that are controlled by the Republicans. Now, let's see. It's pretty impressive how EU neoliberals, including you, I learned that I'm a neoliberal, trying to frame Trump as a chilling, dangerous, crazy man who's just really the honest expression of the same neoliberal, without the mask. They're just sad Trump is now aiming against them with more firepower. That's one vision of the thing, but I mean, that the US... I work for Republican, sorry for the exchange. Yeah, last I check, I'm not a neoliberal, and I never worked. I mean, I didn't work for Republican, I worked for an MEP, but yeah, no. Hors sujet. So where was I? So yeah, Trump is Trump like exactly the same as the US used to be. No, you can't say that. That's not that the US defended their interests, yes. That they were assertive in defending their interests, yes, and that's fair. Everybody does that. However, there were rules to the game. You don't attack your allies, you do not cross certain lines, which Trump threw out the window, and that makes it problematic, especially since he's using the same tools as countries that, like Russia, like North Korea, etc., that do not recognize multilateral rules, which was the basic of the international order since the Second World War. So in that sense, yes, Trump is very different from past presidents. He's defending what he perceives to be American interest, but throwing out the window everything else. So it's not just a question of he's shedding the mask or whatever. He's throwing the book out. Trump is an isolationist, far from a liberal. Debatable. Trump used to be an isolationist. It's true that at the beginning, Trump was saying, yeah, I don't give a shit about the rest of the world. I just want the US to focus on the US. In that sense, yes, Trump was an isolationist. Trump too, no longer. Now, he is more imperialist in the sense that Trump probably realized that he can do whatever the fuck he wants because other countries are terrified of them, of the US, of the US power, and so he's saying, okay, I'm going to pursue what I perceive to be the American interest, but only the American interest, and I'm going to take whatever I want from the outside. And so, from that point of view, it's not isolationist. It's imperialism in the sense that he's projecting US power to take what he wants. In Venezuela, he wanted Venezuelan oil. He intervened to try to get what he wanted. He wants Greenland. He's going to take Greenland. So he's no longer really isolationist. He's imperialist, and you can also see that in his project of the peace board, the board of peace, where he's trying to create an alternative to the UN, to the United Nations. That's an expression of imperialism because then he wants to redraw the rules of international relations, where him and the US are the arbiter. It's no longer the UN. The rules, what is acceptable or not, what he wants to do or not want to do in terms of international politics, he decides. So from that point of view, I don't think Trump is isolationist anymore. He used to be, he is not anymore. And then that's also, like I was going to say, misunderstanding, a miscalculation of the Europeans and the rest of the world probably on Trump too, because we assumed that Trump was still isolationist. He's not any longer. He used to be. He used to push an isolationist point of view, and even during the campaign to get elected the second time, he was pushing an isolationist agenda. Since his election, he's not isolationist anymore. He is imperialist. Imperialism doesn't oppose isolationism. Mussolini wanted autarky for Italy, but he started by trying to make new colonies in Africa. I'm trying to think if it's if it's a correct. No, I don't think so because okay, you're right. Italy wanted autarcy, and so they took indeed Libya and new colonies in Africa to try to get the tools to be able to be in autarcy. Trump, in his latest iteration, is not looking for autarcy. He's saying in all his speeches, we are the world leader and nobody can challenge us. So it's not just I don't want anything to do with the rest of the world and I'm just taking what I need to be in autarcy. He's taking what he sees as necessary to be able to do whatever he wants, but he's also saying, I'm doing this because I don't want anyone to be able to challenge me as the first world power, and so the one who does whatever he wants. So, in that sense, I still don't think we can say he's a pure isolationist anymore, and that creates problems within the Republicans, because you have part of the Republicans of his MAGA movement who are isolationist and are actually criticizing Trump for what he's doing, because say, yeah, you promised us to be isolationist, that the US would just like focus on itself and no longer like do random bullshit around the world, and now you're intervening in Venezuela, you're getting involved in the Israelo-Palestinian conflict. Now you want to take over Greenland, so you're not doing what you promised us. We just want you to focus on us and leave the rest of the world burn. We don't give a shit about the rest of the world. So the new geopolitical stance of Trump is divisive within part of the Republican within the Republicans. To be fair, trying to say what Trump is a bit of a nonsense. Trump has no idea what he will do tomorrow. Yes and no. I think that Trump is unpredictable in what he can do and announce, but we can still have an analysis on the doctrine. He has a doctrine. That doctrine now is kind of a new US imperialism, or mixed with some isolation, so it's kind of a mixed format, but he does have a doctrine now. According to that doctrine, he can do whatever random bullshit because he's Trump, and he doesn't know what he's gonna do tomorrow in that sense, but now he has a doctrine, a geopolitical doctrine. It can be dubbed the bully doctrine. The bullying is a method. It's the Donroe doctrine. It's okay. Again, Donroe doctrine. It's the US saying, okay, that part of the world is mine. That's not isolationist. That's not isolationist. It's yeah, that part of the world is mine. The Western world is mine, and that's it. So where was I? Où j'en suis? Lost in my article. So yeah, we were okay. So we were talking about last year. That seems like an eternity ago in Trump world. Something quickly. There we go. Ultimately, so the EU decided not to retaliate and took a deal which tripled tariff on the bloc to 15% while cutting duties to zero on American industrial goods. So that was while the deal was seen as imbalanced and unfairly tilted in favor of Washington, which it was, let's be honest, the Commission said it had provided clarity and stability for business in a difficult geopolitical scenario. So there, the Commission, under the instruction of member states, indeed accepted a deal that was unbalanced, but probably was the best, close to the best thing they could obtain to put an end, or rather, I mean, to be fair, I never saw that as a full end of the trade war, more as a ceasefire, to gain some time. Isn't that deal off as of today? Yes and no. because the trade agreement between the EU and the US is existing and not existing. So back in August in Thornberry, what we call the EU and the US concluded what we call the trade agreement, which is not a trade agreement because it was not a document, it was more a political commitment. Okay, this is politically what we agree, the broad terms of what the EU-US trade relation will look from now. So it would be capped at 15% trade tariff. The EU would agree to put zero tariff on American industrial goods, etc. So it's more like we politically agree on what relation will look like. And then you have to make the political instrument, the legal instrument to do that. The EU put on the table internally the zero tariff on American industrial goods. So the law that says, okay, there won't be any tariff on these goods in application to the Thornberry deal, political deal. That deal was examined by the parliament. It was in the parliament, and the parliament had to decide what to do with it. There was already a debate within the parliament whether or not to postpone the approval of that agreement because of Trump's escalation in Greenland. The EPP was resisting a bit because we don't want to connect trade and Greenland, which was a bit hypocritical because Trump spends his time linking trade with every single issue that he wants. But yeah, and with Trump announcing the trade tariff against European countries because of Greenland, the EPP flipped and said, okay, that's not possible. And so indeed, I think today they voted to postpone in Parliament the approval of that deal. So for now, the deal is in the freezer. There's nothing happening, but it's only on the part that is zero duties on American industrial goods. So part of the deal is in the freezer for now. Is it completely out the window? We will see. It depends a bit on what happens in the coming days. There's a possibility that if Trump doesn't de-escalate, he can perfectly say, okay, remember the deal we made in August, the Thornberry Agreement, fuck that, we go back to the full trade war, in which case, indeed, the deal will be off. But for now, it's sort of in the freezer, pending what will happen next. Where was I? So while the deal was seen as imbalanced and infertile, okay, I just read that. At the time, the idea of using the trade bazooka was only floated, but never seriously considered. That is because the anti-coercion tool was seen as the nuclear option. The anti-coercion tool is really like it's the gun you put on the table, is the big red button. So the ACI allows the EU to shut off access to the European single market, representing 450 million consumers. It limits trade licenses and access to public procurement tenders. For American services, it means the European market would be off the table, or bearing in mind that it's not full. Like it's not you push the button and then everything shuts off. It's a range of things that you can do. If you decide to only shut off public procurement in certain market or in certain company and allow for others, you can do it. It's a la carte. It's not all or nothing. So you have like granularity to decide to what extent you use it. But again, the ACI is the big red button, is the gun you put on the table, and it's first and foremost actually a negotiation tool. Like the way it's designed, it takes actually a long time to activate the ACI, the anti-coercion tool. Why? Because, like I said, it's the gun you put on the table. So you say, okay, I'm activating ACI, so I have first to do an assessment on whether or not it is coercion, the measure, etc. that I would trigger and everything. And I give myself 6 months to potentially discuss with the other country. So you say, okay, you're fucking up. I'm putting the gun on the table, but we have 6 months to potentially find a deal. And so it's in your interest to find a deal. And then if we don't find a deal, then we can move ahead. So it takes a long time because it's a negotiation tool first and foremost. It's to try to force the other party to make a deal to show, okay, I'm serious about this. Okay, so it's literally what they were saying next. So the tool is not automatic and it takes time to implement. For many, the power behind it comes sorry, in the form of deterrence. Once the trade bazooka is out, it is clear that the EU means business and is willing to enter a fight with the single market as leverage. Once the question of coercion is raised, the European Commission has 4 months to assess the case and the action of the third country in question, after which EU member states must decide by a qualified majority whether to activate the instrument or not. If that happens, a negotiation phase with the country in question begins. If talks fail, the EU can deploy a broad range of countermeasures beyond tariff. The tool covers services, investment, and access to public procurement. It also allows for steps such as excluding foreign companies from EU tenders or partially suspending the protection of intellectual property rights. The implications are such that any response under the ACI must be proportionate and not exceed the level of injury to the European Union. So, again, if you have a small, let's say, case of coercion, you don't go with the full nuke. So what are the implications for the EU? There are many second-round effects. The first one stems from the fact that the ACI has never been used. It's a very recent tool, 2023. Member states have often talked about it, but don't really know what kind of implication it could bring about on political and geoeconomic terms. Also, again, it's a deterrence tool. It's the gun you put on the table, it's not meant to be used. It's the threat. This is why countries from Germany to Italy have repeatedly cautioned against deploying it too quickly or without a good legal case behind it. Berlin and Rome were 2 of the member states most in favor of cutting a deal with the US last year. Last year, even as the US threatened to put punitive tariff on the bloc, the EU also feared that deploying such strong measures against the US could backfire and damage the transatlantic relation. That goes way beyond trade. The EU still hopes to keep Washington engaged in the continent's security through NATO and discussions around Ukraine's peace settlement. And also that's the problem when dealing with the US, and Trump in particular, is that they connect everything. And that's one of the reasons why the EU agreed to a bad deal last year. Because even if on paper, if you are a trade versus trade, the EU is big enough to potentially hold its own against the US. The US is bigger, but not that much. So what Trump did is say, hey, if you mess with me on trade, I'm going to mess with you on Ukraine and on security. And there, you absolutely need me. So there, Trump was using Ukraine as leverage. Say, hey, you want me to help? You don't want me to sell off Ukraine to Russia? Well, then give me what I want on trade. And there, the EU gets stuck because Ukraine is of absolute strategic importance for the EU. They absolutely need the US because the US is the basis of the main pillar of the European security apparatus, and so they're like shit. He puts the knife to our throat. Okay, we can't be as tough with them as if we were just in a pure trade discussion, because he's putting all the things on the table where he has the advantage, and we don't have a choice. Shit, we should have been more self-reliant. Yes, but again, it's easy to say now, oh, in 2026 we should have done that in the past to be less dependent on the US. 25, 30 years ago, that did not make sense. So, yes, now we clearly see, okay, we should be more self-reliant. It would be also a mistake to rewrite history and say, oh, that was we were utterly stupid. It was absolute stupidity to rely on the US 30, 40, 50 years ago. No, because 25, 30, 50 years ago, there was a rationality and a logic in relying on the US, and it made perfect sense to do that. So we have to be careful. Now, clearly, there's a realization, okay, what used to be a certainty and what we all took for a certainty in the past, the US would remain a reliable partner, security partner, trade partner, etc., is not the case anymore. The US is going rogue. We have to become more self-reliant. The problem that we have now is, how do you handle the transition? Like, doing a transition from big dependence on the US to being more self-reliant, I don't think there would be absolute full autonomy. That's a process that takes 10 years, at least, normally. And you don't want to be in a situation where you have to do it in 6 months, especially with Russia next door, etc., etc. So the big problem for the Europeans say, okay, we realize that we have a dependency, that we cannot rely on the US anymore, that they're not the certain allies that we thought they used to be in the past. We need to bridge. How can we gain time to do that transition without triggering the orange asshole in the US and creating a huge problem for us right now? That's the key problem for the Europeans now. There was things in the last 20 years, but it became really clear on the first Trump presidency that we can't rely on. I mean, I still disagree that there was signs 20 years ago. For me, I still see like the real break Trump won. Before Trump won, like, you may dislike Bush, you may dislike Obama, etc., etc. And in the case of Obama, there was also a bit of self-delusion on the way Europe was seeing Obama, but there was never like a threat to the place of the US in the European security apparatus, etc. I mean, Bush Jr. is a big critic, is one of the biggest critics of Trump today. But it's true that Trump won. It's where we see, okay, shit, things are not going the right way, and the naivety probably, or the Europeans probably were naive and all were quite keen on falling back to their comfort. They thought that Trump won was an anomaly, that it was a fluke. We had one crazy guy that was actually still being kept a bit under control by the establishments, etc., etc., etc. But once Biden was there, okay, we go back to the good old days. Things are back to normal. That was naive. And also seen as the option. Now the Europeans see that even if there was like also some, Trump one did have an effect. It did have an effect. We can't say that after Trump everything went back to pre-Trump in terms of thinking on European autonomy, etc., etc. There was a change, but it was much more chill. Like Trump 2 shows that you need to do it now. The way the Bush administration behaved when France and Germany didn't vote their allies on Iraq was a sign it could go wrong. Of course, it was politic. At no point did the Bush administration say, we dislike that France and Germany is not going with us in Iraq. We're pulling out of Europe, or we're putting trade retaliation. There were political tensions, but at no point did Bush threaten a trade war or say, oh, well, then fuck NATO. At no point did that happen. Obama did say yes, careful, now our future priority is Asia, so you need to prepare. And there, I think it's more a mistake of the Europeans than of Obama. Obama did say, okay, guys, things seems to be relatively stable with Russia. We're having issues with China. We want to focus on China, so you need to do more on to assert your defense. Obama never said, fuck NATO, we're rolling out, etc. He did say, okay, guys, you need to do more because we also need to refocus on the Pacific. And the Europeans were kind of, oh yeah, no, it's fine, we can wait. So there was no animosity. It was not like the US is not reliable or refusing to ensure the security. So yeah, we have other priorities as well. Do more. You can still count on us, but also do your part. Is the way they react. Yeah, but that there is bad reaction. Yeah, sure, of course. That's part of the game. But the US, I mean, that you have public opinion that is turning, that you have animosity. It's not an issue. It's not an issue per se, as long as there is certainty that the establishment is not going AWOL as well. At no point did the administration threaten to do anything because the public opinion in the US was turning against France and Germany because they were unhappy because our position on Iraq. So I disagree. I mean, I disagree with the fact that the signs were there with Bush and Obama, and that we were blind and didn't see the signs. That I disagree with. All right. Let's go. Where was I? Shit, I'm lost in my thing. Okay, I read that. Okay, so the EU still hopes to keep Washington engaged in the continent's security through NATO and discussions around Ukraine's peace settlement. Beyond the US, the EU also considered triggering the ACI after China began weaponizing the export licensing of rare earth and critical minerals. Okay, so that's China. I'm gonna skip it. Let's say it like that. Which are vital for Europe's tech and defense industries at the end of last year. And ultimately, the EU opted for dialogue. So what happens next? The EU could decide this time around President Trump has crossed the line and gather a qualified majority to trigger the anti-coercion instrument. So important, it doesn't require unanimity. Only qualified majority is required to activate the anti-coercion instrument. So qualified majority between being 55% of the member states representing 65% of the population. Where was I? So European leaders have said they will not be blackmailed and express full solidarity for Denmark and Greenland. If they go ahead, that will likely mean a new trade war and fresh escalation, but it may be the price to pay for the European Union to defend the sovereignty of a member state. Which is the big difference compared to before. Before it was mostly a trade fight, so about economy. There we're talking about sovereignty. We're talking about the US trying to take the territory of another country, which is another scale. Unlike the EU-US deal signed last year where a compromise was deemed possible, Copenhagen has repeatedly said there is no room for negotiations when it comes to transferring the sovereignty of Greenland and has rejected any possibility of a sale. The EU could go back to the retaliatory tariff it drew up last year and, this time around, implement them, hoping the impact on US companies and consumers ahead of the midterm elections, where Republicans risk losing control of the House of Representatives and the Senate, could prompt Trump to change course. So, you may remember, Trade war last year. The EU doesn't activate the ACI, the trade bazooka. Instead, they say, okay, we're going to do counter tariff. You put tariff on our product, I put tariff on your product. And so they had made a list of the equivalent of 93 billion euro of trade tariff on American products. Those tariffs never came into force. They were never applied. Why? Because there was the Turnberry Agreement in August, and so they were suspended. They say, okay, we found a deal. We suspend this tariff. But the tariff were suspended, or rather, they were temporarily suspended. And on paper, they would still, they could be applied automatically. Why? Because they were frozen until beginning of February. Meaning that if the EU decides not to postpone again this tariff, from the 7th of February, automatically, you would have 93 billion euros tariff that would apply on US products. Which is convenient because Trump's tariffs are supposed to come into force on the 1st of February. So they already have a tool that they pre-made and that luckily they could reuse right after Trump's new tariff. So for now, there's already a tool on the table that they can use. They can already tell Republicans, hey, careful. We already have that on the table. On the 7th of February, it's back. So you are incentivized to do to stop with it. And that would be most likely the first tool they're going to use. They're going to say, okay, we have this 93 billion. Do you change course? No. Then the discussion on ACI will then actually start. So one thing is clear, if the tariff on Denmark and its allies go into effect on the 1st of February, the European Union and the United States will enter a new trade war. Any questions on the ACI before we continue on this? Just checking the time. Yeah, we're good. What's going on in the chat? You have a question? Go ahead, Tenval. Your question is generously accepted. Only because it's you. What is the qualified majority to activate it? The classic one. 55% of the member states, so 15 states, representing 65% of the population. So it's the classic qualified majority. So that means that you don't need unanimity. That means that Hungary cannot block it on its own. That's all thing. Then the question is, you have to convince enough countries to reach the wait, Nightbot has okay. Careful with the spam. I can't restore the message. So careful with spam. Where was I? So yeah, you have to convince still the majority. So there the question is, okay, can you convince particularly the big five? So the 5 biggest countries of the EU, Germany, France, Italy, Poland, and Spain, to go that way. Because if you start playing with the ACI, you put the big guns on the table. And you really escalate things. And we know that, for instance, Italy is clearly not keen on escalating things with Trump. Germany would avoid it if they can, particularly because of their trade agreement, etc., etc. Poland, they would be afraid of the security dimension, etc., etc. So there would be a need to convince. Either the Baltics, Poland, Italy, Hungary will accept. Hungary for sure will not accept. That's for sure. Like Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, I don't expect them to accept. But the thing is that there we still, I mean, especially, it all depends also on how Trump frame things. If he keeps on the line, I'm going to take Greenland, and so I'm going to take over territory, that is a fundamental issue. Because there it's really about sovereignty. It's someone saying, I'm invading your territory and I'm taking it for mine. Which is kind of a big fucking red line. That's even all countries have to realize, including these, because the Baltic, the Polish, they also have to realize that if they accept that for the US, then they legitimize Russia doing it. And that could come bite them in the ass. So they also have to take a principled position on this. So that's why privately, probably apart from Hungary, all member states kind of saying, yeah, that's pretty fucked up what Trump is doing, and we don't support it. But they still hope that they can climb down. And if Trump says, okay, fine, we can find a deal on securing the Arctic, and that way I don't have to take over Greenland, then that's different. If Trump says, okay, taking over Greenland is off the table, I accept that, and now it's just a question of securing the Arctic, access to resources, etc., that's a very different story, because then member states will say, okay, we're going back to a more sane kind of discussion, and we can find a deal. And so we can put the ACI off the table. Because, okay, we're ready to accept to increase our the securization of the Arctic. We're ready to make a deal on access to raw resources in the Arctic, etc. That's a reasonable discussion that we can have. But if Trump keeps saying, fuck you, I'm going to take Greenland, and there's no other alternative to that, and I don't remove the option of taking over by force, that's a fundamental issue that even countries that heavily rely for security on the US, the Baltic and Poland, cannot ignore. So the thing is, how does Trump behave? And is it possible, like, if you see that Trump is behaving like batshit, but the Congress, even the Republicans say, okay, we won't let Trump do that. Okay, you're going to say, okay, maybe there's something that can be possible, but otherwise, yeah, there's a pressure to do something, because we're talking about fundamental issues. Because if you let that happen, anyone can take by force any part of your territory. It's just whoever is the strongest can conquer territory. Which is exactly what you said Russia can do. And the ones that are going to be important in the discussion are the Italians. Because Meloni is really not keen on going into a fight with Trump. She has good relationship with him. She's kind of part of the spectrum of the political spectrum that Trump's like. So she would much rather have a good relation with him than not. But at the same time, she said, yeah, that's fucked up what he's doing in Greenland. And if you can convince Meloni that, okay, Trump is crossing red lines, that unblocks a lot of discussions. But, I mean, in any case, I don't expect anything to happen before February. Because member states, like I said, will wait on whether or not the trade war will restart. So will there be new tariff? So first question. And two, they then will have the internal discussion on do we want ACI, do we not want ACI, discussion with the Congress, etc. So the ACI will not come for a few months. That's for sure, because you need to prepare the terrain, you need to make it politically viable and have pretty much exhausted all the other options. I know about having good relation with him, seems really grumpy and disgusting. I mean, good relations, all things all things considered, let's say, she has good political relations with him. She can talk to him. He's not actively trying to fuck with her. She has a working relation with him. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that they are a BFF. I would not exclude that Meloni thinks Trump is completely batshit insane. To be honest, I would not be surprised if even Orban thinks Trump is insane. He's useful to him, but I'm not sure Orban is saying, oh no, of course Trump is absolutely sane and a normal person and a good and a great guy. I think he's much more cynical and pragmatic in his relation with Trump than anything. Yeah, Orban is not crazy. Orban is not crazy. He supports Trump because Trump does exactly what Orban wants. I mean, it's kind of interesting, like the Orban-Trump relations, because they feed each other. Trump probably dreams of building in the US what Orban did in Hungary, and Orban is using Trump as a way to legitimize what he's doing in Hungary and as a template for the rest of Europe. But yeah, Trump, probably his objective is to do in the US what Orban did in Hungary. That's his objective. He's probably in a pit because others don't want him. He's probably think he's too far now. I don't think so. I mean, Orban, he's not crazy, and he has a doctrine. Like, that's what I usually say. Like, if you take the European leaders today, the two European leaders who have a constructed ideological vision of Europe today, it's Orban and Macron. They have two completely opposite projects and vision of Europe, but they have a proper doctrine, a proper objective and vision of Europe. So I don't think that Orban is like, oh shit, I went too far and now I have to stick with it because I don't have a choice. I think no, he has his vision, he's pushing this vision, and he sees Trump as the way to push forward that vision. So I don't think like there's like, okay, I don't have a choice, even I made a mistake, but I don't have a choice anymore. I just think he's like, no, let's go. Orban's vision in the past, even when he was like, ironically, Orban is less isolated today than he was in the past. In the past, he was much more isolated ideologically. He was much more isolated ideologically, but his position was always, I'm right, they're wrong, and time will prove that I'm right. And in his view, seeing the rise of the far right everywhere in Europe, Trump, etc., he sees that as validation of his theory. What ideology can we call it for? Could we call Orban that Orban as a fascist ideology? Good question. Good question. Like, for sure, like, I'm talking about vision of Europe, ideological. Illiberal democracy, for sure. with very strong inspiration of fascism. Yeah, that is it full old school fascism? I'm not sure. That's the could be debated. Could be debated. Where was I? Orban doctrine to me is just getting his pocket filled with European money. I don't think so. It's not just that. The doctrine of Orban around Europe is not just getting money. That's why he's not breaking with the EU. But beyond that, his view is dependent on that. He wants to reduce Europe as just a talk shop that distributes subsidies. The doctrine of Orban is illiberal democracy. All right, let's move on. So, ACI. So why the EU should but won't fire its trade bazooka at the US? Calls to activate the anti-coercion instrument in response to Trump's latest tariff threat are well-founded. The evidence suggests Trump will again stop short. So if Brussels were confronting any adversary other than Donald Trump, it would already be preparing to deploy every trade instrument at its disposal. Instead, faced with the prospect of sweeping new US trade restrictions linked to Washington's threat to annex Greenland, EU ambassadors failed to agree on triggering the bloc's anti-coercion instrument ACI, the so-called trade bazooka, during talks in Brussels on Sunday, according to diplomats briefed on the discussion, which, again, they don't want to shoot first. Leaders will now take up the issue alongside broader relations with Washington at an extraordinary European Council meeting on Thursday. But few in Brussels expect a serious debate about deploying the EU's most powerful trade tool, despite it having been designed precisely for such worst-case scenario. At present, there is no question of deploying the ACI or any other trade instrument against the US. Well, they are the trade tariff, one EU diplomat said. But there's going to be a big push of the French to put at least reopen the discussion on whether the gun should be put on the table, because it's true that ACI was specifically designed for this kind of purposes. Here we are literally like the textbook definition of what ACI was designed for. The problem, again, is that in the EU-US relation, it's not just trade, because it's also about security, and there, the US has the advantage. And has shown that it has absolutely no qualm about using, or at least Trump has no qualm about threatening to use that to his advantage. Europe's response to Trump's tariff threats tends to follow a familiar pattern. First, the US president announced punitive levies. Second, France calls for retaliation using the EU's most powerful trade weapon, which is logical. France is the bad cop when it comes to EU-US relations. Third, the bazooka remains unfired, even as the tariff or the threat of them lingers. That cycle, which culminated last year in a trade settlement with Washington regarded by many in Brussels as markedly asymmetric, which is true, appears to be repeating itself. The bloc is again scrambling after Trump pledged on Saturday to impose additional tariff of up to 25% on multiple EU countries unless they agree to the complete and total purchase of Greenland by the US. That being said, there's again the fundamental difference that it's not just, we're not just anymore in an economic issue, it's about sovereignty. It's about the US wanting to de facto conquer the territory of another EU member state. So we are way beyond the kind of discussion that we were having last year. So that's why I don't think it's exactly the same. Analysts have warned that France's renewed push to activate the ACI may once again fail to secure sufficient backing from other EU countries, even though an attempt to coerce Denmark over Greenland fits squarely within the instrument's intended purpose. The ACI, which entered into force in 2023 and has yet to be used, allows the EU to impose a broad menu of countermeasures, including investment restriction, procurement bans, targeted sanctions, and tariff on goods and services. And that's probably one part that we didn't discuss as well. Probably as part of the potential countermeasures of the EU against the US, services, and particularly digital services. Last year, the EU chose not to attack US services, digital services, so typically the big tech. An area in which the US is widely dominant in the transatlantic relations, because they saw that as an escalation, particularly given the proximity of big tech with Trump. Now, given that we are in the context of something that is much more grave than last year, probably that would be much more palatable for member states to go attack digital services, because again, there was escalation. So probably US services, tech services, will be put on the table of countermeasures, of European countermeasures beyond the ACI. You can activate sanctions against US services without needing to go in the ACI. I would say that in order, the EU will strike goods, then services, and then ACI will be the final step. So goods, we know that there are the 93 billion trade tariff that are on the table already for beginning of February. Next, there's going to be a discussion on US services, and if and when that moves forward, then we're going to talk about ACI. They're going to increase the pressure bit by bit. That's why I also don't think the ACI will be activated if it's activated before a few months, unless things escalate to an extent that like shit really hits the fan. Like if the US actually invades Greenland, yeah, ACI will probably be used, because they're like all the lines have been crossed. But in a context where there is not yet an invasion of Greenland, that will be the ultimate state. So yeah, activation requires a qualified majority, at least 15 of the EU 27, representing 65% of the bloc's population. This is a political test, said Tobias Gerke, a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. If Europe does not manage to muster a strong response right away, it once more demonstrates to DC that the cost of taking over Greenland are limited and manageable. You show weakness, or they will not dare to use it. And actually, that's right now the answer of the US. When the US Besant, so the Secretary of State on Trade, I always forget his exact title, but yeah, one of the US Trade Minister, when asked about, aren't you afraid that the EU will take sanctions? Besant said, yeah, I'm not worried, because the EU will never dare to do that. They will do a pseudo committee and nothing will come out of it. So they are banking on weakness from the EU, which, to be fair, they are precedent to this. For instance, last year. Then again, given the level of threats, there's also an incentive for the EU to not let that fly. But again, depends a bit on how the discussion evolves in the coming weeks. Where was I? Okay, so Ignacio Garcia Bercero, former senior European Commission trade official, said failure to deploy the ACI, which he noted could allow retaliation within weeks under a so-called urgency procedure, would point to deeper institutional dysfunction. If the ACI is not used in circumstances like this, said Garcia Bercero, now a senior fellow at Bruegel, it will never be used. Do you actually believe they will use it? I honestly see it as purely communication and damage control to avoid public backlash. Again, ACI is first and foremost a negotiation tool. So I don't expect it to be used in the short term. It will be used if things escalate. For sure, if you have military invasion, that's for sure. Then it depends on how things degrade, whether Trump is increasing the level of threat, putting security in it, etc., etc. So I don't fully exclude the activation. Or at least that they say, okay, we're launching the first step of the procedure. Because again, like if you don't use it, like you throw out the window any kind of credibility, so including institutional credibility. So the EU will be under big pressure because if Trump escalates, keep escalating, and they don't use it, there is like literally no limit to what you can do then, apart outside of military invasion. Trump has much more cards than the EU's ACI, though. I don't see how we have many credibility in negotiation. Well, he has many cards. True. And he has shown that he doesn't hesitate about using these cards. Or at least threatening to use these cards. The EU has some cards as well. The EU has some cards. Huh? You have the ACI, you have the all the sovereign assets that American, like a typical American debt that is owned by the Europeans. I think there's like something like $13 trillion of US debts that are being owned by Europe. And there are discussions, okay, as part of retaliation, could you sell those EU sovereign assets to fuck with the American markets? You have that. You have also the question of the US bases. Like if Trump, let's say Trump says, okay, if you keep doing that, then I will not defend you. I will stop defending you on with NATO. The US has many bases in Europe. These bases, yes, they are important for the security of Europe, but they're also very useful for the US because all these bases, they are basically the platform of the US for all their operations in Africa and the Middle East. Meaning that if the Europeans were to say, okay, we're closing down American bases, if the US say, oh, we are leaving NATO or not abiding by NATO, etc., etc., you could touch the American bases, and then you fuck with the entire American policy with Israel and Iran, which are important to the Americans. So it all depends on the level of escalation, as always. The more Trump escalates things and does fuck with the absolute red lines, which are ensuring the security of Europe, the more things become possible. Because Europe could reach the conclusion, okay, we fully lost the US, and now we have to switch in survival mode. A major Trump card would be switching an imperialism to another by reinforcing EU-China relation, but I don't believe... Nah. Nobody will want to go with China. I mean, they will not go into... They will not make a relation worse with China, but they will certainly not say, oh, China now ensure our security. Yeah, fuck no. Nobody will do that. I mean, China is allied to Russia, so no. There's no world in which the EU says, oh yeah, now we do NATO with China. There's not a universe in which that happens. That's not happening. At best, the EU does not increase tensions with China, but that's it. Allied to Russia? What do you mean allied to Russia? Who is allied to Russia? China is ally to Russia. And yeah, China is definitely an ally to ally borderline Russia is becoming a vassal to China. Because of the war in Ukraine, Russia is becoming more and more. I mean, Russia is becoming more and more dependent on China. Like the economy and the war effort of Russia relies to a good extent on China. Yeah, but the EU will never go to China. Like, forget about it. Forget about it. That's not happening. Like, that's simply not happening. Like, the idea, we're going to switch the US with China. Yeah, no, that's not happening. There's not a universe in which it happens. Like, if shit hits the fan, like the US abandons NATO or something equivalent, what's going to happen is the Western countries, like EU and beyond, like Canada, Norway, even Japan and Korea to an extent, they will try to form like a new forum, like a new NATO without the US. That's. I mean, we're going to discuss that after. I have an article specifically on that, but they're not going to go to China. Like, forget it. Where was I? So early signs suggest that Paris will again struggle to build momentum. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, one of the EU's most influential leaders and widely regarded as close to Trump, has not endorsed France's proposal. Instead, she described the US president's threat as a mistake, attributing it to poor understanding and communication over some capital's decision to send troops to Greenland in recent days. So, Meloni is trying to salvage things however she can. Diplomats also stress that EU countries have other options short of the ACI. These include suspending implementation of the EU-US trade deal and reviving a $93 billion retaliatory tariff package. So that's going to be the first option on the table. So prepared but never deployed during last year negotiations with Washington. Two EU diplomats said any decisions on reimposing those measures would come only after the 1st of February, and when an initial 10% US levy on Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, Netherlands, and France is due to take effect. By the way, Trump announced tariff on some European countries, so Sweden, France, Germany, Netherlands, Finland. Oh, Estonia is not on the list? That's weird. Because Estonia also sent okay, maybe I'm missing one. And they're saying that as if they could just target like imports from France, Germany, etc. The Commission has already said, yeah, no, that's not how it works. We're in a single market. We have a customs union, meaning that if you want to put 10% on Denmark, Sweden, France, etc., you put 10% on the entire EU. You're not going to pick and choose. You're not going to say, oh yeah, but it doesn't apply to Hungary. No. It's everyone will get 10%, or no one will get 10%. just say and put 10% on things coming from France, Germany, etc. What you can do, however, is target specific categories of products that come from certain countries. Like for instance, when Trump says, yes, I'm going to put 200% tariff on champagne, that would target France only. Why? Because champagne is a GPI, geographical protected appellation. Indication, sorry. Meaning that only champagne coming from the French region of Champagne can be called champagne. That's the principle of the GPI. So by targeting GPI, then you can target only the country that produces that kind of product. But otherwise, if you say, let's say that the US say, yeah, I'm going to put 10% on French cars, that doesn't work. It's all cars coming from the EU that would get 10% because the EU is a single market, it's a customs union, so a car may have been produced in France, but then being exported from Germany, from the Netherlands, from Italy, etc., etc. So if you just do the 10% blanket thing, it's all the EU or no one. Where was I? So the Commission, which must formally propose ACR activation before EU capitals can vote, has also adopted a cautious tone. Tariff would undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral, President Ursula von der Leyen wrote on social media following Trump's remark, without outlining any concrete countermeasures. The EU, of course, is in a de-escalation and they don't want to provoke, so they say, yeah, okay, chill the fuck out, let's talk. Which is expected and normal. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, struck a similarly restrained note. We cannot let our dispute distract us from our core task of helping to end Russia's war against Ukraine. She was actually criticized for that statement, Kallas, when she said, oh yeah, you know, all this is distraction from Ukraine. She was criticized being, yeah, okay, you're become, I mean, I made a meme about that and people really weren't happy about, I mean, like the fanboys of Kallas were really unhappy about that. Because it was declaration that was seen a bit as tone deaf, in the sense that Kallas only cares about Ukraine, and what happens in Greenland gives a shit. What the only thing that matters is Ukraine, which was seen a bit as tone deaf. Or even if, like, she's right in the sense that yes, the strategic priority is Russia, and you would much rather focus on Russia and Ukraine rather than having to deal with bullshit in Greenland because of Trump. But saying it as a way of saying, yeah, okay, who gives a shit about what Trump is doing in Greenland? Let's just focus on Ukraine. The way it was said was seen as a bit tone deaf because, yeah, even if there's not an active war in Greenland yet, we're still talking about a country trying to potentially conquer by force a part of European territory. So arguably, it's kind of a big fucking deal. So the way Kallas said thing was seen as a bit tone deaf, and she was criticized a bit on that declaration. I say, oh yeah, okay, she's only focused on that. Yeah, give them Greenland what they ask next. Yeah, I mean, it's a principal position, like even beyond that on sovereignty. So the remark was revealing. It underscored why Brussels backed down in last summer's trade talks and why it may do so again. Again, I disagree because last year's dispute was only about trade and economy. There we have a question of sovereignty. For me, that's a big difference. The EU remains acutely concerned that Washington could curtail military or intelligence support for Kyiv. To be fair, they already kind of stopped most of the military and intelligence support. Or in an extreme scenario, withdraw from NATO. Deutsche Bank also warned that deploying the ACI could provoke damaging US countermeasures, which for sure would happen, particularly given Europe's dependence on American technology and financial services. The EU ran a 98 billion euro surplus in goods trade with the US in 2024, but a service deficit of almost 148 billion euro according to EU figures. So on goods, so physical products, we had the advantage. We export to the US more stuff than we buy from them, but on services, the contrary. We rely more on US services, tech services, but also banking, etc., than they do on us. Which is why last year, when Trump was saying, "Oh yeah, look, the EU-US relationship is unfair. The EU is taking advantage of us," the Commission is saying, "Yeah, okay, we have a trade surplus in goods, but we have a trade deficit in services. So the two balance out. You can't just look at goods without looking at services," which of course Trump was not doing. And also why, if the EU wants to hurt the US, they would go after services, because there the US relies much more on the EU than the country, or in the sense that they export more services than the country. Yeah, not everything is the same value strategy. Yeah, of course. It's everything then has to be approached in a granular way, because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by doing stuff on acting on stuff that would actually hurt you. The US would do the same. So supporters of the ACI argued that those risks are manageable. The instrument could initially be used to target US goods rather than services, so that's what I said. Although I still think for that they would not use ACI, they would use like regular tariff. You don't need the ACIs to go on goods. Reducing the likelihood of a severe American response. Garcia Becero said this phased approach would also give Brussels room to calibrate the response over time. The ACI gives you more margin to modulate your response, he said. If the initial package is not enough, then you have more flexibility to adjust the retaliation and potentially to enlarge it. For now, however, Europe appears more inclined to keep the bazooka on the shelf, which, again, makes sense. They will first do tariff on good, then they will do tariff on services, and then they will use ACI. Bearing in mind that also ACI goes beyond just tariff. We're talking IP, we're talking public procurement, that sort of thing. That's the real added value of ACI. Like tariff, you don't need the ACI to do tariff on goods and services. It's all the things beyond tariff that are the real bazooka. So first you will go on tariff, goods, services, and then potentially ACI. Any questions on that before we look at, well, what if we had to do without the US? The thing that Europeans dreaded the most, but now are forced to kind of think about because, well, it's becoming a real possibility. Up, we switch. All right. I don't see questions. Let's switch them. So let's talk security. Like I said, so one of the key advantage that US at this point I almost hope it goes full economic sanctions so that we never let ourselves be fooled again when it comes to our sovereignty. If you go full economic sanctions, be careful what you wish for. Be very careful what you wish for. Because a full-on trade war, you're gonna feel the consequences. Both sides will feel the consequences. So, be careful what you wish for. And I would say that at this point, I think there is a full realization that, yeah, we need to move on from the US. I think the realization is there, and like member states have realized that Trump is not a fluke. It's not a bug. It's a feature of the US. It's not coming back to the good old days anytime soon. So I think the realization is there. The question is, well, better late than never. Again, we can have the debate on how late are we? And also the problem is how do you do the transition? Because the real problem is how do you do the transition? Normally that's a transition, you need 10 years to do that sort of thing because of how entangled our relationship are with the US. If you need to untangle everything, well, maybe not everything, but to strategic extent, that takes a shit ton of time and preparation. And the problem, if shit hits the fan and suddenly you have to do it in 6 months instead of 10 years, that creates huge problems. And that's the real the real thing that member states and the EU is afraid of. Because they know they can't deal with it in 6 months. Like, you can't do a transition over 10 years. Over 6 months, that's simply not doable. Like, the damage would be insane. So that's also why they try to postpone things as much as they can, because they try to gain time. Because you can't just snap your fingers and say, okay, now I'm self-reliant, I have strategic autonomy, etc. etc. What if we just want to see the world burn? Well, that's another problem then. Okay, so security. So Trump's Greenland threat pushed Europe towards divorcing America. With NATO thrown into question, some officials see the coalition of the willing as the basis for a new alliance without the US. As with many failing relationships, it's been a story of arguments, unspoken tensions, and trying to keep up appearances in public since Donald Trump re-entered the White House a year ago. But for many European governments, including America's longest-standing and most loyal allies, Trump's threat of punitive tariff against anyone who tries to stop him taking Greenland was the final straw. Divorce, they believe, is now inevitable. In private, these made European officials describe Trump's rush to annex the sovereign Danish territory as crazy and mad, asking if he is caught up in his warrior mode after his Venezuela adventure, and saying he deserves Europe's toughest retaliation for what many see as a clear and unprovoked attack against allies on the other side of the Atlantic. I think it is perceived as one step too far, saying one European diplomat, who like others was granted anonymity to speak candidly. Europe has been criticized for being weak against Trump. There is some truth in that, but there are red lines. Senior European officials increasingly believe it's time to face the truth that Trump's America is no longer a reliable trade partner, still less a dependable security ally, and urgently look to the future. There is a shift in US policy, and in many ways it is permanent, according to a senior official with a European government. Waiting it out is not a solution. What needs to be done is an orderly and coordinated movement to a new reality. So that's like the realization that I explained. They understand it's not a bug, it's a feature. And so we need to move on. And how do you organize that movement, that change, without creating more chaos? I just saw something. Trump relayed a message about how China and Russia are not the real enemies, but the UN and NATO are. Nah. Let me check that. Let me check that. That would be insane. Let's see. Trump, enemy, NATO, UN. Which, I mean, again, would be coherent with the worldview of... oh shit, you're right. So Trump retweeting on his thing a message that says, so at what point are we going to realize the enemy is within? China and Russia are the boogeymen when the real threat is the UN, NATO, and this religion. I put religion in quote because it's not a religion, it's a cult. Holy shit. So there is coherence there with Trump's worldview. Trump despises multilateralism. He hates anything that is multilateralism. Why? Because when you work in the context of a multilateral organization, individual power is diluted. The US cannot, or it's more difficult for the US to weigh the its full strength, use all the advantages its personal strengths allow in the context of multilateral relations, and so the context of international law, than if you are in bilateral relations. That's why, like in trade, the US tried as much as possible to deal not with the EU, but with individual countries. Until they realize that it's not possible. When you're talking about trade, you have to deal with the EU. But why? Because, again, if you take the EU globally, the EU as a bloc is economically almost equivalent to the US. Meaning you can have a rapport de force that is slightly more equal. But if you go to a bilateral relation, even the biggest country in the EU, Germany, compared individually to the US, the rapport de force is infinitely to the advantage of the US. And so that means the US has much more possibilities to get advantage, take advantage over Germany compared if it was taken as a bloc. And it also allows, for instance, if you take bilateral, I'll say Trump could say, oh well, I'm giving a better deal to Hungary because he's a friend compared to France or Germany or countries that I don't like because they don't have a far-right government. So fundamentally, Trump hates multilateralism because it limits the ability of the US to use the full weight of its power and the ability of the US to do whatever they want, or use whatever tool they want and use interpersonal relations. So that's why it's coherent that Trump says the enemy is UN and NATO as international organization, because he doesn't want to deal with international organization. He doesn't want to be in international organization because it dilutes his own power. He wants to do things on a bilateral manner. And ironically, China and Russia push for a similar kind of thing, because the model that was dominant until now, like basically that was modeled by the US and Europeans, was multilateralism. Say, okay, we have the rule-based world order, meaning there are global organizations that sets global rules that we all abide by, so the UN, WTO, you have NATO, etc. So it's not individual strength, individual force that matters, is we have common rules and we abide by these rules. Russia, China, North Korea, etc., they don't want multilateralism, or like they want a multipolar world, in the sense that you don't have like a general set of rules that applies to everyone. You have regional powers that do whatever they want in their sphere of influence. So you would have the US power, you would have the Chinese power, you would have the Russian power. They do whatever they want in their sphere of influence, and you don't mess with the others. So China does what it wants, the US does what it wants, etc., etc. So there, it's the rule of the most powerful one, the bigger one. And Trump is buying into that. Like the Don Rock doctrine is exactly that. He's saying, part of the world is mine. That part of the world, nobody messes with me in there because that's my territory. In that sense, that's the US imperialism. US imperialism, in my sphere of influence, and you don't mess with me. Outside power, don't mess with me. And the Russian, I don't give a fuck. They can do whatever they want in their own sphere of influence. Chinese, well, they do whatever they want in China, but I have a conflict with them because we have the Pacific, and I want to dominate the Pacific. So he has an opposition with China. Trump is obsessed with China, but the fact that he attacks the UN and NATO, again, that plays into the worldview of Trump. Although, that's probably the first time that he attacks NATO that openly. UN, he always hated NATO. He always hated UN. NATO, I mean, he did undermine NATO, but that he's saying that now NATO is the enemy. That's a step, another step. Vance and the other hate Europe, ideologically they hate us because they know they are less. No, the reason why the real reason why Trump and Vance are so hell bent on destroying destroying A, the EU, and B, the democratic model of the EU is because it is a counter model. It's much easier for the US to go into a Orban-like regime, an illiberal democracy, if they can point to the EU, say, hey, look, Europe does the same. Everyone is going the illiberal way. So that means that we're normal. We're not doing something that the other are not doing. Everybody is doing it, so it's fine. But if you have the EU and liberal democracies that keep existing as a counter model, well, then it shows that the model that Trump and Vance and the MAGAs are pushing is the anomaly. That's why they hate the EU and they hate European liberal democracies, because they represent a counter model and a political model that they hate objectively. It's not because they have like a complex, or like it would be a mistake to think that they have a complex of inferiority, that they think, oh yes, the Europeans are superior. No, they don't think that they are inferior to the Europeans. They are convinced that they are, on the contrary, superior, and that the Europeans should not have a model that is incompatible, not going the same way, or works as an alternative to what Vance and Trump are pushing. And again, like I said, the EU is an international organization. It represents everything that they hate, because it creates a counter, something that can be a counterweight to the US, and they hate that. That's the real reason why they absolutely hate it. But yeah, okay, so now it's official, NATO is the enemy. It will be very interesting to see how big of a stone he throws at Davos. Yeah, we only at the first year. Yeah, that's the insane thing. It's not. I think it's now officially a year that he's been in power. That's the insane thing. Where was I? Ah, yeah. So we were saying, yeah, that's exactly that. It's not a bug, it's a feature, and everybody is realizing that now. So the coordination to move to the post-US Western world has already begun, as has the big conversation about what comes next. Barring a radical shift in the approach of the US, this process seems likely to end in a radical reshaping of the West that would upend the global balance of power. The implications range from the transatlantic economic damage as trade tensions rise to security risk as Europe attempts to defend itself without American help before it is really fully ready to do so. That's the point I was making. You're being forced to do a transition that normally takes 10 years. in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. With, in the background, Russia that is looking with great appetite to part of Europe, and all security services saying that they are rebuilding forces to potentially do something by 2030. Hence, the panic. Let me switch back. There would likely be costs to the US as well, such as in its ability to project hard power into Africa and the Middle East without access to its network of bases, airstrip, and logistical support that Europe currently provides, and that are key for the American policy towards Israel or Iran, for instance. Alongside all the talks of retaliation by targeting US trade, diplomats and government officials in national capitals are also considering what a long-term split from Washington might bring. For most, the prospect is a painful one, ending 80 years of peaceful cooperation, mutual support, and profitable trade, and dealing a death blow to NATO in its current form. Plenty of governments want to salvage what they can, while Italy's alt-right leader, Giorgia Meloni, is trying to rebuild relations. But for some government officials, a post-US future for Western allies isn't hard to imagine. For starters, European states, including those not in the EU like Britain and Norway, have spent much of the Trump's second terms working in an increasingly effective group that already operates without America, the so-called Coalition of the Willing to support Ukraine. And that is probably what is going to happen. So, what happens if NATO collapses or the US leaves NATO? Let's say NATO collapses. For whatever reason, NATO collapses. What will happen? Most likely scenario, it's not that nothing will happen. Like say, okay, NATO doesn't exist, everybody does what they want. You still have a need for at least a pan-European security instrument. Why? Because you need to secure Europe, particularly with Russia looking west. And most likely, it would follow the model of what is currently the Coalition of the Willing. And also, you're right, I'm starting with the pan-European and then expanding. But you would have as a basis, so EU, Norway, and the UK as a basis for the European continent. And my guess is that they would probably try to maintain NATO, because even without the US, NATO has a lot of advantages, because it's an existing structure, you have an integrated command, you have logistical supply chain, so you have plenty of things that are very useful even without the US. So I think the Europeans would do everything they can to maintain NATO, even if the US leaves. If the US leaves, they will maintain NATO to keep the added value of it. So you will have the pan-European version, and then they will probably try to add, let's say, the like-minded country. Canada, for sure. Potentially Japan, Korea, Australia, so the rest of the Western world outside of the US that would need still security guarantees to some extent. Even if the core focus would be on Europe, but yeah, I would expect indeed, like whatever happens, you would have EU, Norway, Britain, and Canada to be part of whatever comes next. If the US leaves NATO or NATO collapses. And the Coalition of the Willing shows that you have a format that works. The free world, yeah, what you could call the in a way the free world, yeah. National security advisors from 35 governments are in regular contact, meeting frequently online and in person, as well as interacting via less formal text messaging. They are accustomed to seeking multilateral solutions in a world where Trump is a big part of the problem. Levels of trust in these circles are generally high, according to people familiar with the way the group operates. Nor is it just at the level of officials. national leaders are themselves rolling up their sleeves and working in intimate new groupings. Leaders including the UK's Keir Starmer, France's Emmanuel Macron, and Germany's Friedrich Merz, as well as the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Alexander Stubb of Finland, and Meloni of Italy, regularly text with each other, often in the same group chat. Over the past year, they have developed a well-drilled routine of exchanging messages whenever Trump does something wild and potentially damaging. When things start moving quickly, it's hard to do the coordination, and this group chat is really effective, said one person familiar with the arrangement. It tells you a lot about the personal relationship and how they matter. Do they have emotes? I'm sure they have emotes, yeah. I would give a lot to see to look at the group chat, indeed. That must be a very interesting group chat. That's for sure. Yeah, pretty much. I think Trump does something wild is pretty much basically the exchange every weekend. The thing that I would be really interested is like, so you have this group chat. They probably keep it still quite formal. Like I would be very interested in seeing like very very informal chat, like a chat between leaders that really get along with each other, like a chat between Macron and Merz, or Macron and Starmer. There must be things in there. I would be very surprised there are not things like what the fuck is he doing now, or stuff like that. I think it's more the bilateral, like the proper bilateral chats where they are really informal and between leaders that really get along with each other. That's where you probably have some things that must be pretty wild. Imagine, like I can't imagine the what that group chat looked like when there was like you probably saw today the news of the letter that Trump sent to Norway. When Trump sent a letter to Norway that Norway leaked, in which he's basically saying, Trump is saying to Norway, well, you know, since I didn't win the Nobel Prize, the Peace Nobel Prize, I don't give a fuck anymore about peace. I'll just do whatever the fuck I want, and I'll take Norway. I'll take Greenland. It's like completely insane, a completely insane thing. And like when that thing leaked, like the group chat must have been like, yo, what the fuck is going on? People are saying, is that fake or not? Yeah, I guess Macron will have probably written, I fucking told you so. Yeah, that group chat must be interesting, to say the least. But yeah, it shows that you would not start from nothing. If the US leaves, there is working relationship and a willingness to do stuff together. So, like, the thing that, like, if Trump really wanted to fuck with the Europeans and everything, he would not leave NATO. Like, if he really wanted to strategically fuck with the Europeans at large, he would stay in NATO and become like an absolute troll and basically sabotage NATO from the inside while keeping it alive. Like, in that sense, like, he keeps people stuck in NATO and they don't move on. Kind of doing an Orban, yeah. Probably that's the right analogy. Kind of doing an Orban, but in much more aggressive. Like, preventing NATO from properly functioning, and preventing the others of creating something outside of NATO. And kind of de facto, like, by doing that, and you could even argue that's what he's already doing. By not leaving NATO, he's forcing the other to do the first step. And that way you can say, oh yeah, I'm not the one who killed NATO. I was staying in NATO. You're the ones who left NATO. I didn't do anything. So don't blame me. Probably that's what Trump would do if he's smart about it. I remember the first Trump presidency, I was always, no, he can't have done that. I think I said that on the stream in the past. I don't know if you've watched The Boys. It's a TV show on Amazon. It's a parody. It's a satirical take on the superhero genre, with a lot of political satire about American politics, and it's super weird to watch now because the show is intended to be a satire, and now when you watch that, things that were intended to be open satire, you're like, yeah, they would do that in reality. And you're like, shit, like now, like The Boys become almost like a political documentary. That's the thing that is scary. When you look The Boys, you're like, yeah, they would do that in reality. They would do that in reality. At some point when I hear people claiming the last straw to decide the military operation in Venezuela was the dance of Maduro, I kind of believe it. I think it's... I don't think that was the thing that... I think the decision was taken already. V for Vendetta feels pretty accurate. Yeah, there's a... I think, I mean... there's a V for Vendetta. Endor is very interesting politically. I mean, all the show. The one show that I need to watch, I haven't seen it yet because it's not on Amazon or whatever, is you have an Italian show. Mussolini. Shit, what was the name of the show? Mussolini, Child of the Century. It's an Italian show that is about the rise to power of Mussolini. And apparently it's very good. Like it's kind of, it's filmed in a kind of House of Cards style, in the sense of you follow Mussolini, and sometimes Mussolini breaks the fourth wall and talks to the audience to explain how he's pushing fascism, making fascism politically acceptable. And apparently it's very good. I need to watch it. It's just finished. I haven't seen it. It's one of the shows I absolutely want to see. Apparently, it's brilliant. And I really need to see it. It's adapted from a book, if I'm not mistaken. Like if you want recommendations, a show that I started watching, I need to restart it, is Occupied. Or The Death of Stalin is great. It's a comedy, but it's very, very good. I love The Death of Stalin as a movie. But yeah, a TV show that's also interesting, Occupied. It's a Norwegian show. Again, watching that now is pretty ironic. The pitch of the show is Norway is invaded by Russia, and it's about how the government deals with the invasion, building the resistance and everything. I watched the first season. I think there's 3 seasons in total. I need to restart the show. Pluribus, I heard about it. I need to watch it as well. But yeah, there's a big market for very interesting political shows. Yeah, I need to watch Borgen. You're right. Shit. I need to watch Borgen. Is it on Amazon? Let's see. Borgen. Amazon Prime, is it? I'll check tonight. But yeah, you're right, I need to watch Borgen. It's on Netflix? Yeah, I'll manage. I can ask I can ask my parents to give me the access to their Netflix. I'll binge watch it. Okay. Where was I? Did I mention Endor? Watch Endor. Star Wars is... I love Star Wars, but... It's at Borgen. Okay, yeah. But do watch Endor. Endor, great show. Best Star Wars show ever done. Where was I? Alright. The informal active arrangement is known as the Washington Group after the collection of European leaders who visited the White House with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky last August. Their approach for the past year has mostly been to keep calm and respond to his policy action rather than taking the bait of his provocative words. That ethos has oiled the wheels of the Ukraine peace process, with the coalition of the willing closing in on the framework for a peace plan that the US is signed up to, including American security guarantees for Ukraine. This marks a significant achievement given that Trump earlier ruled out the US military playing a role. I can't watch Star Wars since Disney retconned the actual... yeah. I'm an old school Star Wars fan, so the Star Wars legend was my shit. And I agree that I don't like the new a good part of the new lore. But then again, it's not meant for me, and the old lore needed some cleaning up. But I do very, very much recommend Andor. Like, watch Andor. Like, if you like political show, watch Andor. It's extremely good. Like, probably, like, Andor is probably one of the few good things that Disney did with Star Wars. Like, you have Andor, you have Clone Wars, you have Rogue One, and the first seasons of Mandalorian. Those are the 4 good things that happened to Star Wars under Disney. You could make... I'm not going to go into a review of the Star Wars shows. Anyway, where was I? This marks a significant achievement given that Trump's earlier ruled out the US military playing a role, although it was a very soft commitment of the US on the security guarantees for Ukraine. It's very soft. But Trump's air-raising over Greenland has now tipped the balance. Gone is the softly approach to the American president's threat. Even Starmer, normally the most circumspect of leaders, called out the president's tariff threat as wrong, including apparently in a direct call with Trump on Sunday. The Greenland crisis has focused minds on the question of how to move on without America by their side. The coalition of the willing started as being about Ukraine, said another diplomat. But it has created very close ties between some of the key people in the capitals. They have been building up trust and also aptitude to work together. They know each other by name and it's easy to reach out to send texts. This format could potentially become the seedbed for a new security alliance in an era where the US no longer supports NATO and European security. A new arrangement wouldn't exclude cooperation with America, but nor would it take it for granted. Also in the text chat with the Washington Group leaders is Zelensky himself, which brings another intriguing idea into the mix. Ukraine is by far the most militarized country among those represented, with a huge army, a highly sophisticated drone production industry, and more expertise in the realities of fighting a war than anyone. While Ukraine has long sought membership in NATO, that now seems less of a prize than it once did, as America's promises to underpin any security guarantees grows less convincing by the day. If Ukraine's military might were to be included, when added to that of France, Germany, Poland, and the UK, among others, the potential armed power of the coalition of the willing would be vast and would include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Although Europe's needs to defend itself with less American support is an old topic of conversation, recent days have seen a flurry of initiatives and headlines from Brussels. Officially, the EU has resolved to be able to defend itself by 2030, bearing in mind the Russian threat, potentially by 2030. Although, there's one thing that is there on paper, but is the big problem with the development of of a European defense framework is willingness, in the sense of the challenge for European defense, particularly in the West. I'm talking France, Germany, Spain, Italy, etc., is to get the political spectrum and public opinion to wake the fuck up. Like, I'm French, I look at the political debates in France. Clearly, the idea that France would have to get involved militarily to defend the Baltic states, that's not a given. You have a good part of the political spectrum in France, and Spain as well, etc., who would happily sell half of Europe to Russia if it buys them some comforts. So there is a need there to build the political acceptance that exists in Eastern Europe and in Northern Europe to the idea, okay, the good old days of the peace dividends is over. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need to accept that A, sacrifices might be needed, and two, that we may have to go, and that it would be justified and used and needed to go defend Danzig. That's where the big challenge politically is. Beyond the nice group chat and everything, because you can have the group chat, you can rebuild an army and everything, but if then politically you're like, yeah, I build a big army, but I don't want it to leave ever my country because it's scary, and you know, the Balts, they're very nice, but I don't want to. I actually want to defend them. That creates a big problem. That again serves Russia and everything. Where was I? Okay. What about Bardela's criticism of Trump? Well, the far right is in a bit in a bind right now because they spend their time like hyping up Trump, just like they hyped up Putin back in the days, and now they have to say, yeah, but no, actually, we don't think like him, machin. They're trying to show themselves more Europeans than they were. But still, I mean, Bardella criticizing, so Bardella, the leader of the French far right, criticizing Trump. Okay, that doesn't change the fact that Bardella would happily sell the Balts to the Russians. Yeah, I never seen this meme. Yeah, exactly. That was my meme of the day, indeed. Where the far right suddenly is not so keen on being seen with Trump, like they don't want to be seen anymore with Putin. Somehow they seem to have a pattern of having fascination with wannabe dictators and people who threaten democracy and Europe, but I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence. I will leave you to reach your own conclusions. Where was I? Yeah, okay, 2030. So, a European Defense Commissioner, Andrius Kubilius, a week ago proposed a standing EU army of 100,000 soldiers and revived the idea of a European Security Council of around 12 members, including the UK. Von der Leyen touted a new European security strategy, though few details have been provided yet. So, on that, I'm skeptical. Like, the idea of the EU army, so that's a classic, oh, we need the EU army, machin. I mean, we talked. I think we discussed that last week. Like, the idea of a EU army, it's the thing that, okay, you have a million questions to solve and to deal with before you go into the EU army of 100,000 soldiers. Like, the 100,000 soldiers doesn't come from nowhere. It's corresponds more or less to what the number of US soldiers currently in Europe. So the idea is, we're going to replace the US forces with EU forces. But again, there's a million questions and problems to solve before the idea of an EU army of 100,000 soldiers is even feasible. Like logistics, governance, rules of engagement. Like there's a million questions to be solved. Same thing on the European Security Council. Yeah, that's an idea, but you have like a million issues before you can create that sort of thing that still needs to be solved. Like a question of who would be on that council? How do you resolve the fact that countries would be arguing about why would they get to decide the security policy, my security policy, etc. So for me, all this is like a lot of theory crafting. It's interesting and it's in a way important to have these discussions now because of the problems with Trump, and we need to start thinking, okay, what could a post US security guarantee look like? So that's why I don't fully dismiss it. I think it's important to have this sort of discussions, but it's still like very much like a theory crafting and kind of wishful thinking. Like you're giving like, I mean, again, it's also to give like a political objective, like a very long-term political objective. But again, you have millions of questions to solve before that. So there is wide agreement that this conversation about a new European security architecture needs to happen and fast. EU leaders will meet in person for an emergency summit in the coming days to calibrate a response to Trump's Greenland threats, though the discussion may range far wider than that. With Trump due to attend the World Economic Forum in Davos, there is also a possibility of face-to-face talks between the Europeans and the American sides. After speaking to Merz, Macron, Starmer and NATO chief Mark Rutte, von der Leyen said on Sunday that Europeans would stand firm in their commitment to protect Greenland. We will face these challenges to our European solidarity with steadiness and resolve, she said. Given the current moment, some creative thinking will also be required. And that was the final article of the day. Any questions or stuff you want to discuss, like on this or beyond? Let me switch to the full screen. And if there is no more questions, then we'll start our conclusion. In the meantime, let me put stuff aside. Boom. What's going on there? Up. Okay, I don't see any questions for now, so I will start to conclude then. Sorry. Still recovering from my cold. So what was I saying? So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed today's news review. Lots of things to discuss, and I guess that we're not done discussing these issues in the coming weeks. Somehow, I guess that we're going to talk about Greenland, NATO, and Trump for a while in the coming weeks. Like, I'm more struggling to find something that is not related to that. Like, generally today I was like, shit, I'm going to do a stream entirely about Trump and Greenland. It would be nice to talk about something else, but yeah, at the moment, it's sucking all the oxygen. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the content. As usual, if you like what you saw, do follow the channel. If you have a Prime lying around, do toss a coin to your streamer. That's always appreciated. Next time I see you, Friday at 5, as usual, for the news review in French, which will be on Twitch and, of course, on Twitter. Hello, Twitter. Say, come on Twitch. That's where we can discuss. We can already put Trump on to number one ranking of who is the most influential over the EU for the next. Yeah, I think I think Trump will indeed be a feature of all the EU power ranking for a while. That's for sure. That we can already take for granted. But yeah. So yeah, next time I see you Friday. Do follow me on my social media. Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all the good things to get the memes, the threads, the information and everything. And yeah, on this note, I wish you all a very good evening, and I will see you on Friday or next week for the usual streams on Tuesday and Friday. Have a good one, guys. See you next time. Bye bye.